It's round 13 of the 2025 F1 season and we head to Spa-Francorchamps and, well, it is a sprint race weekend. So what can we expect to see here at Spa? Because, unfortunately, as much as I love this circuit and as many of you guys do too, we don't always get an action-packed race here that, unfortunately, this track most definitely deserves. But anywho, onto the format for this weekend, and it is a sprint race weekend. Now, we have had a sprint race here in the past a few years ago, and it provided a bit of an action-packed race. So, yeah, be sure to tune in for it. Of course, qualifying, as we know, is super tight now anyway, and is very exciting. So, sprint qualifying is definitely going to be the case, which will be on the Friday. So, only one practice session, FP1, 1 hour for these teams to dial in their setups, which is going to be very important in what no doubt is going to be a very impacted race weekend by the weather, because the weather is, yes, definitely going to play an important role, which we'll get on to shortly. We may see some teams that in the increment weather conditions and, of course, in the sprint format itself excel as they have done throughout this season. Now, updates are being brought by some of the teams to further improve their car. Of course, not major updates, Ferrari being the largest of those rumoured, supposedly, with a new rear suspension. Of course, Ferrari has been a team that has excelled in the sprint race format in the races itself and qualifying because of the lower amount of fuel that you need, only a third of the race distance, so you can have a lower starting ride height compared to when you're having to put 100 kilograms of fuel in the car and, well, raise that ride height for qualifying, which carries over to the race to ensure it still complies. And we saw, of course, what happened in China for them, but they'll be looking to hopefully make some steps forward and at least maybe fight for the race win or solidify a podium, because they definitely missed out on the podium opportunity in Silverstone. Of course, Nico Hulkenberg thanks them for that, at least. Now to the track itself. Spa-Francorchamps is the longest track on the F1 calendar. The lap time here is around just over 1 minute 40 seconds, ranging up to 2 minutes long depending on the weather conditions, hence why we only have a 44 lap race here. Now, a lap at Spa requires drivers to be on full throttle for over 70% of the lap. So a good power unit and top speed is super essential here. We'll see teams and drivers focus more on a lower downforce dependent setup, depending, of course, as always, on the weather. I'm going to mention that a lot in this video. And, well, there'll be sacrificing performance in that middle sector where it's more tighter and twistier, at least in dry conditions, to ensure that, yes, they can maximise the full throttle zones from the exit of turn 1 into Les Combes and the third sector as well through Blanchimont into the bus stop chicane. Those are the primary overtaking opportunities where we have 2 DRS zones here, one down the start-finish straight, which is not really that impactful anymore, primarily due to how long these drivers are on full throttle, around 30 seconds from the exit of turn 1 all the way through Eau Rouge, up over Raidillon, down the Kemmel Straight into Les Combes, where we have our second DRS zone, which is super important. So you're towing, if you're the car ahead, you're towing and dragging the car behind you all the way from the exit of turn 1 through Eau Rouge, and then you're also going to be giving them DRS as well. So many times do we see that be the prime overtaking spots down into Les Combes at the end of the Kemmel Straight. But last year we did see it be a bit more difficult because of the impact of dirty air. Will we see that rear its ugly head again here this weekend? Hopefully not, and we get more opportunities of overtaking. Something to keep an eye on as well this weekend is, because this is a very high power dependent circuit, well, we have seen in times gone by this circuit be the prime choice for drivers and teams taking engine penalties because of how much of an advantage a new power unit can give them. That all-important extra horsepower, all-important top speed gives drivers many an advantage, and we have seen drivers in times gone by, Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, take brand new power units here, take that 10th place grid penalty and still win from that far back down the grid because of how much of an advantage it gives them. The weather may play a role in whether or not drivers and teams take that engine penalty here this weekend, because it'll be less impactful because of potentially the slippery conditions we'll see this weekend, but something to keep an eye on for sure. Now on to tyres, because Pirelli have provided us, for the first time since 2022, and only the second time in 7 years, the last time prior to that was in 2018, they have skipped a tyre compound. So we have the C1, C3 and the C4 in use here this weekend in dry conditions. If is the big key word here, as we will check the weather report straight after this. But let's just assume it is going to be dry conditions here this weekend. Of course, we mentioned last year that it was the C2, C3, C4, and that the racing itself, teams opted for a two-stop strategy, and well, we had a bit of a stalemate up and down the field. There was not really a tyre offset, many teams on the same setup, and well, just provided us with little to no racing. We saw, of course, George Russell extend to that one-stop strategy, which even on those considerably older hard compound tyres, they were still able to be in a good enough condition to hold off Lewis Hamilton, who was on much fresher new hard tyres. And well, you may be instantly thinking, hang on a second, we used the C2 last year. This year it's not there, but we've gone one step harder to the C1. Won't that just provide a tyre that goes even considerably longer than what we saw the previous year? Potentially. However, what we do have here this weekend, if we do see fully dry conditions throughout, is that we do have a sprint race and we have sprint qualifying, where the medium compound tyre is supposed to be used in both Q1 and Q2 with the soft in Q3. And well, that's going to provide, of course, with the sprint race itself, drivers and teams having to think more openly about their strategy come Sunday. We may see some teams, as we know, with only 8-point scoring positions available in the sprint race itself, which I still think is just wrong, as it doesn't promote necessarily the full racing that we want to see and the competitiveness that we want to see up and down the grid. We will see potentially teams give up on the sprint race depending on where they qualify to ensure that they have a better strategy option available to them on the Sunday. So what we could see on the Sunday, depending on how that C1 tyre performs, and it's not a guarantee that that C1 tyre is going to perform, as it has been a bit temperamental this season at where it has worked and where it hasn't. We could see a two-stop strategy be easily implemented, or we could see a 2-3 stop strategy because the hard compound tyre just isn't viable, it doesn't switch on, or we could see something where it's a potential crossover of, is it a 1-stop, is it a 2-stop? But hopefully what we do see is that there are at least varying strategy options where there are tyre offsets, and we get something like we saw in Bahrain where teams are on different strategies, different tyres, and it provides us racing and potential for overtakes. That's primarily what we want to see, and it's primarily what Spa-Francorchamps at minimum deserves. But as I mentioned, the big if is the weather. As you can see here from the BBC, as I'm recording this, it is Wednesday, so this weather report may change. It has already changed because I looked at this yesterday and it was showcasing that it was going to be wet all weekend, and that was the case for Saturday, whereas now it is showing it is more dry. But Friday, as we can see here, looks to be quite wet. The morning session for practice looks like it may be dry, potentially wet here, with of course 28% coverage, pushing up to 50%, and of course later on in the afternoon 63% there is for the sprint quali. So we're going to get a sprint quali where it is wet. Now this is the question that drivers and teams have to ascertain and test, is with it potentially being a dry Saturday and a dry sprint race, do you go and risk that dry setup on sprint quali? We know how important, of course, it is to have track position in this current era of F1 cars, but if you are running considerably more downforce for those potentially very, very wet conditions, as we've seen many a time over when we have come to Spa, what do you do? That's the toss-up that the drivers are going to have to try and do. We saw it on the flip side last time around at Silverstone, where Max Verstappen had that considerably low downforce setup that was tremendous in dry conditions, but then he was left floundering a little bit come the race day with, of course, that trimmed rear wing. He still did a tremendous job until that spin, of course, under the safety car restart, but that is the risk that you run, and the similar risk that these drivers are going to have to face when it comes to qualifying on the Friday for the sprint race on Saturday. However, the last thing these drivers want to do, of course, is put their car in the wall when it comes to qualifying and put themselves on the back foot come the rest of the weekend when the points truly matter on Sunday. And then similarly, on the flip side, when it comes to the Saturday qualifying after the sprint race, where teams are able to then change their setup after the sprint race to the qualifying for the main race, they're going to have the same dilemma again. Do we go for that wet setup and risk potentially those qualifying on the dry, similar to what we saw in Silverstone? Someone like Max Verstappen goes, sod it, I'm going to go for completely low downforce, get on pole position and deal with it on the Sunday? Or do we see them go, no, we're going to be conservative and go for that race setup, run more downforce, because the weather on Sunday looks to be thunderstormy, looks to be considerably wet, and I hope this isn't the case, because we have seen, of course, postponements. 2021, where we saw, of course, the debacle of them running only a few laps under the safety car and them getting half points. I don't think that will happen again, but yes, we have seen, of course, conditions be treacherous at Spa many a time over, and it's not the fact that these teams and these drivers don't have the ability to perform in the wet. No, it's purely down to visibility. Simple as. Just go watch some of the onboards back at Silverstone, where the visibility was so poor. Of course, Isaac Hadjar went into the back of Kimi Antonelli. Yes, Kimi broke a lot earlier, but Kimi was also braking early and being conservative because he also, in turn, couldn't see ahead of him because of the spray. So that is what the teams, or that's what the FIA are always trying to avoid. And yeah, the teams and the drivers, it's one thing to see it on the TV coverage, but to be actually in the helmet and behind the wheel, visibility is very, very poor, and it's definitely unsafe. So hopefully this changes and at least decreases come Sunday. But yes, teams are definitely going to have their work cut out for them this weekend in relation to the setups they decide to choose, because it could make or break your race weekend. So lastly, now my predictions, and it's a tough one to predict this weekend because of that weather and because of it being a sprint race weekend. However, I think something that is just guaranteed again is a McLaren 1-2, unless they make a mistake, a driver error, which we have seen in these conditions. But you just look at Silverstone, there was obviously considerably wet conditions there, and they drove off into the distance when obviously there was enough laps to do so without safety cars. So I think we're going to see something of the like again. I think especially if it is wet, we know that car likes running more downforce than its competitors, and that's really then when it excels. So I think someone like Max may put a spanner in the works again if we get a dry qualifying on the Saturday and the sprint race. We'll see how he fares, of course, with potentially a wet Friday. Does he try and go for a lower downforce setup in wet conditions to give him a better opportunity in the sprint race? I don't think that strategy would work. It would work if... It will probably work for him on the Saturday qualifying for the race on Sunday, and he does something like he did in Silverstone, because I think without that spin under safety car conditions, the second restart, I think he would have comfortably have got third place and a podium there, which would have been an unbelievable drive considering he was running a lower downforce setup. So going to be a tricky one. I think, yeah, McLaren's 1 and 2. Which order? I'm going to go Lando. I think we could see Lando regain the championship lead here with the sprint race and, of course, the main race on Sunday. There's more points on offer. 8-point swing is what he needs. I think he could take the championship lead by 1 point going into the Sunday. Could be completely wrong, and it could be Oscar extending his championship lead. It's super close between the two of them. Of course, until that moment under the safety car, Piastri was comfortably looking like he was going to win Silverstone and extend his lead, but it didn't end up that way, did it? So, yeah, ultimately, as long as I get a battle between the two of them, that's what matters. And behind them, I think genuinely we could see another Silverstone. I think we could see another Another Hulkenberg podium. Don't rule it out. Don't rule it out. The way that man is driving at the moment. I think Mercedes, who knows what Mercedes is going to turn up. I just don't think that even with potentially some updates, I don't think they're bringing a large enough update package to really progress them further enough up the grid and have a performance like they did last year at Spa. And also Ferrari, they're a complete unknown. Silverstone pole position was on the cards for them there, but they both balls it up in the last couple of corners. Hamilton should have comfortably have got P3, but Ferrari was slow to react to their degradation. So it all depends on whether that rear suspension allows them to run the car, I guess, as low as they want to. But in wet conditions at Spa, who knows? Who knows if we even get a race? I think I can comfortably predict that there'll be safety cars and there'll be red flags throughout this weekend. Could we get one in every single session? Potentially, other than maybe the Saturday where it could be dry, as we saw from that weather report. But yeah, ultimately, we want to see some racing and we want to see some element of strategy. And I just hope that, yeah, the visibility is good enough for us to be able to get some racing at Spa, because that is unfortunately what has always kind of been the downfall of this circuit. It provides great drama for us, but it also, unfortunately, yeah, it doesn't provide us, as we go back to 2021, debacles like that and delays in race starts and so forth. So yeah, I think we're in for a very interesting weekend, and with Hungaroring, of course, following it up, it's going to be, yeah, very, very action-packed last couple of races before the official summer break. So yeah, but as always, guys, be sure to tune in to the watch-alongs for every session this weekend. So turn those notifications on, and we will see you guys there. See you then. Bye.